Tikiya Gedolah.
Rabbi David Cooper. We are a disparate group of rabbis and other Jewish clergy that have come today before the Israeli Consulate to protest and demand the end of the unfolding violence. Now, we would be here directly in front of the consulate, but for the barriers that have been put up to try and silence us, but we won't be silenced. We rabbis and other spiritual leaders here serve very different constituencies. We come from different seminaries. We have different ways of interpreting Jewish law. We have serious political differences over Israel-Palestine. We even have differences over how we name the violence that continues to unfold. In order to be here together today, all of us are risking accusations of guilt by association with the other rabbis that are present. And that risk, by the way, far exceeds the risk of arrest that we're taking today. But the violence has got to stop. And it is worth the risk for whatever we can do to help, even in a small way, to make it stop. For 2 years, as the violence has unfolded, there has never been an end in sight. It should have ended a long time before this. Even Israeli leaders have been saying this for so long, and to no effect. They have said that there's nothing more to be accomplished by continuing. Well, I disagree. The continued displacement of the people of Gaza can be accomplished. Their death by starvation can be accomplished. The death of hostages can be accomplished. Ad matai. And for how long? How much longer till it stops when it is ready way past due? How many deaths will it take till we know that too many people have died? And we cannot wait any longer for an answer to blow to us in the wind. That is why we have taken a risk to do this together as rabbis, as Jewish clergy. In this group, we have different political analyses of this horror, but each of us, when we were ordained, we took an oath to teach Torah. That is, in essence, to teach and reinforce Jewish ethical values to our people and to live by those values. We were taught, and we teach, that every human being is created in the image of God. We teach, and we were taught, that what is abhorrent, if it were to done unto us, we must never do it to another. We teach, and we must live by the commandment to not stand idly by in the sight of suffering. We wrote a letter to the Israeli Consul General last week that we wanted to meet with him today. We received a polite reply that this could not be arranged today, but we could schedule a meeting at a later time. We will take advantage of that offer. But the situation in Gaza and in the West Bank has become too dire. Starvation in Gaza continues unabated every moment. We can't wait. Settler attacks on peaceful West Bank villages persist without consequences. My friend Auda Hatamin, a nonviolence activist in the South Hebron Hills, was killed 2 weeks ago, and his known killer is walking free. So despite the risk, despite our differences, despite the lack of association with each other and the ways we use words to describe this violence, we are here under a holy obligation to take action.
Welcome to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills, that's me, where we present clear thinking on confusing topics in challenging times. You just heard the blowing of the shofar, actually of many shofars. and an opening statement from Rabbi David Cooper, who was in San Francisco this past Monday, August 11th, with a group of Jewish clergy who occupied the street in front of the Israeli Consulate in San Francisco in protest against continuing Israeli military action in Gaza and the starving of its people. I need to note that this on-site reporting comes from Moment of Truth volunteers Michael Levy and Batya Kagan, who were at the scene, where about 18 rabbis and cantors sat down in the street after speaking in front of the barricaded building. They were in opposition to Netanyahu's plan to reoccupy the Gaza Strip and to express dismay at the unrelieved starvation and suffering of the people of Gaza enforced by the Israeli government. The civil disobedience action yielded no arrests, although the group escalated from blocking Montgomery Street to sitting in the intersection of Montgomery and Sacramento for approximately half an hour of singing and prayer. From the Santa Cruz County area were Rabbi Paula Marcus of Temple Beth El and Rabbi Hel Mendel of the New Left Progressive Tzimtzum Jewish Community in Santa Cruz County, and Rabbi Chaim Schneider, also known as Howie, who joins us in the studio today, along with Professor of Middle East Studies Stephen Zunes. Welcome, Chaim.
Thank you.
So, Chaim, I'm going to give a little bit of your background to our listeners here so they know who you are: a marriage and family therapist with a school counselor credential, a K through 12 teaching credential. You have rabbinic simcha ordination.
Smicha.
Smicha. Thank you. I think I practiced that ahead of time, but I obviously didn't practice enough. From Jerusalem in Israel in 2003, a master's in philosophy, a BA in political science. And we have to turn the page to get to the rest. You've been a kosher kitchen supervisor with Veg on the Edge in Santa Cruz, and at the Chai House. Is it Chai House or Chai House?
Chai.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's Chai, so it's not like chai tea. It's okay. In San Jose, and you've been a social worker rehabilitation counselor for Santa Cruz County Mental Health Services, teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing, Peace Corps volunteer. And you're saying that's enough. Okay, I just want to say you've also, just to summarize, been on a lot of boards for different temples in the area, and you are also a J Street Rabbinic Cabinet member and on the Leadership Council of J Street, Silicon Valley. And to Stephen Zunes, who is also in studio with us. Stephen is the founder of the Middle Eastern Studies program at USF and author of Tinderbox, U.S. Middle East Policy and the Roots of Terrorism, as well as several other books and a wide range of articles, including an article for The Progressive on what a Harris-Waltz administration might have done about the ongoing war in Israel, the escalation of the war, and the ongoing devastation and mass killing in Gaza. Recognized as one of the country's leading scholars of U.S. Middle East policy and of strategic nonviolent action, Professor Zunes serves as senior policy analyst for the Foreign Policy in Focus project of the Institute for Policy Studies, an associate editor of Peace Review, and until recently was a contributing editor to Tikkun. So we started with the scene in San Francisco. I want to also set the scene for why that happened. And Stephen, I'm wondering if you could, for people who haven't been following so closely, tell people what's actually happening right now in Israel-Palestine and what the Israeli government is planning to do that is actually getting some rabbis who haven't spoken up very publicly about this up to San Francisco to protest.
Well, since the Netanyahu government, with the support of the Trump administration, broke off the ceasefire agreement in March, which had been scheduled to lead to the release of the remaining hostages, the withdrawal of Israeli forces, and a permanent ceasefire. Instead, they resumed war, and it's been escalating, and the civilian death toll has been increasing even more so. They've been targeting journalists. They've been targeting medical workers. They've been targeting relief workers. I mean, this is not collateral damage. This is not, going after a Hamas militant and accidentally killing nearby civilians. This really is a targeted killings. Indeed, there's a growing international consensus that this does violate the genocide treaty. Now, I should mention that genocide is one of those rare words where the popular definition, the legal definition, is actually broader than the popular definition. So we're not saying this is equivalent of the Holocaust or even the Rwanda genocide, but it is a genocide comparable to what we've been seeing in Sudan, comparable to what we saw in East Timor and in Guatemala during the 1980s against the indigenous population. And as with the East Timor and Guatemala situation, the U.S. is backing the genocidaires, backing the killing. And it's gotten to the point that more and more people who are reluctant to speak out against Israeli policies because they felt close ties to the Israeli government for ideological or religious reasons have been saying, no, this really is too much, especially since Hamas had agreed to release the hostages if they had a ceasefire. So this is not about the hostages. This is about ethnic cleansing. And the Israeli government's been quite clear that with the support of the Trump administration, they do plan to depopulate, force over 2 million people out of the territory to build this Mediterranean resort. They haven't backed away from that. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, where Hamas is not operating, where the Palestine Authority and the urban areas they control have banned the organization, attacks by these settler militia have increased, and including killing some prominent nonviolent activists. These are in many ways, again, to use the parallels to Central America, similar to the death squads that we saw in El Salvador and elsewhere. But they are doing this because the United States has blocked the United Nations from taking action through vetoes. They have insisted that military aid be unconditional. I mean, just a couple weeks ago, there was an effort by Senator Sanders, supported by a majority of Democratic senators, actually, that said, "Hey, let's suspend using these rifles that are being used by the settlers. Let's stop these bombs that are these huge bombs that are blowing up apartment blocks and killing civilians by the hundreds." But unfortunately, both our senators, Schiff and Padilla, voted against the blocking, supported this unconditional arms, and as has Panetta. But the fact that our government's not stopping it, and indeed is facilitating it, has led more and more Americans, including people who consider themselves Zionists, including people who, are for whom Israel's security is important to them, are out saying, no, this is not right. And we're seeing hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets of Israel as well. Again, unfortunately, though, our government, with the support of leaders of both political parties, are siding with Netanyahu against all those calling for peace.
Mm. And if you are just joining us, we're talking to Stephen Zunes and Rabbi Chaim Schneider about a protest that happened in San Francisco with several local rabbis sitting in front of the Israeli Consulate and blocking the streets on Monday. Yes, Steve.
I just may add, of course, we're talking about the developing situation that's gotten a lot of people's attention. Of course, it's the starvation. The fact that the Israeli government has only allowed a small amount of aid in through a dubious U.S.-run operation called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is killed.
We're going to get to that. I want to make sure that we cover the protest, and then we're going to get to all of that stuff, including what's actually happening in terms of trying to get aid to Gazans on the ground. Rabbi Chaim, you were up in San Francisco, and I think I traveled with you to San Francisco in maybe the fall of 2023, even when the death toll was already rapidly rising in Gaza. And of course, we had, the terrible killings of October 7th. So you've been active for some time. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, what you're seeing in terms of the changes around you in the Jewish community and why you went and helped to organize this event.
Yes, I've been active for many, many years. As a Jew, I've always felt it's my responsibility to be able to protest when there are violations of international law going on against the Palestinians, which has been happening since the beginning. And so I couldn't, I've never been comfortable with the Israeli government saying that they represent and speak for all Jews, because they have never spoken for me. I may have an affinity toward people in Israel and for the Israeli state, but not an Israeli state that just totally ignores international law. I cannot accept that, and I have to stand up. Just like I did in the 60s during the Vietnam War, the American Vietnam War. But in this particular instance, there has been a change. Things have gotten so bad in Gaza and in the West Bank that this is the first time where, at least locally, a group of rabbis have stood up. Actually, it's really the first time, and in New York it was only 1 week earlier. And so one of the rabbis...
Wait, you're saying this is the first time you've seen like large groups of rabbis speak out together?
Absolutely. Well, you know, Amy, when we went up to San Francisco in 2023, it wasn't a group of rabbis. It was just individuals.
Yes.
And that's always the way I've been involved. And J Street is the organization I've been mostly involved in for a number of years. And although we have a rabbinic cabinet, the rabbinic cabinet has not on its own actually gone out and publicly demonstrated. So this is the first time that I'm aware of. And it started just because one rabbi in the Board of Rabbis sent out a message asking if people would be interested in doing this action. And more than 30 people said they would be interested. Many of them said they would be interested in doing civil disobedience, peaceful civil disobedience, and risk arrest. So that's how it started. And we put together a statement that basically called for three things: surging food into Gaza, ending the war, and bringing the hostages home. And I think that David Cooper actually talked about some of the Torah commandments to us. You know, that which is hateful, if it were done to you, you do not do to another. That comes from the Talmud. You shall not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. And bringing the hostages home, redeeming hostages is one of the most important commandments in the Torah. So how could we stand by and watch any of this go on? We just were not able to. And so I think it was really important that we be out there. Just one other Talmudic quote, and that is, this is from the Babylonian Talmud, which is the Talmud that we follow for the most part. Anyone who's able to protest the misdeeds of their community and does not do so is deemed complicit in their misdeeds. And so I think that's a statement that really speaks to us as rabbis, that we certainly can't stand by and be complicit in the murderous behavior of the Netanyahu government against the Palestinians.
You know, I just want to see if you can speak a little bit. I know that she's not here, and I don't want to speak too much about Rabbi Paula Marcus because she's not here. Unless she wants to call in, you know, which we are accepting calls in the second half of the show. I mean, Rabbi Paula, you know, made a statement early on in this community when she stood against the ceasefire resolution at the Santa Cruz City Council meeting that we reported on here at Moment of Truth, and that was like hundreds of people lining up to speak, most of whom were speaking for a ceasefire. And she was there, you know, in front of the media talking about why this wasn't a good idea. So this is a real shift. I think a lot of people in our community, when they've heard this, have said to me, really? You know? And so do you want to speak to that at all, or would you rather just...
Well, I'll say a few words. I mean, obviously I can't speak for Rabbi Paula, but I've known Rabbi Paula for many, many years. And Rabbi Paula's heart has always been to protect the people of Palestine. And the only thing I can say without having actually talked to her about this directly is that at the very beginning of the war, it was, you know, what Hamas did was so atrocious that it was very difficult for anyone in a position of responsibility and a rabbi of a synagogue to take a stand against Israel reacting to it. But, you know, I hope Rabbi Paula does call in and say something about it. But I don't think it took very long before Rabbi Paula realized that we all need to take a stand and be public.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, we actually do have a clip from her speaking at the protest, so we'll let her speak for herself. You know, Temple Bethel is probably our largest temple in Santa Cruz County, and so it's highly significant, I think. Tell me about J Street. I think J Street tell people who don't know what J Street is, and that I think you've met with our congressional representative Jimmy Panetta on this issue at least once. And how has that been going?
Many times.
Many times. Wow. Okay.
J Street is an organization made up of mostly Jews, but not only Jews. And our position has always been twofold. One is to work with congressional leaders and to be able to explain what is going on and to, make a distinction between, a state of Israel and the government of Israel. And so J Street has always supported a two-state solution so that there would be a Palestinian state and an Israeli state. Some people say that at this point that's impossible. Some people talk about a confederation. However you look at it, J Street supports the Palestinians having a state of their own. And that's always been true. And then there's another part of J Street, which is so part of it is political. We endorse candidates. We give money to candidates to support our position. And then the other part is grassroots. So to organize people on a grassroots level to be able to support this position of basically a two-state type of solution so that there is a Palestinian state.
So let's talk about our candidates then. And our elected official at this moment, you've been talking to Jimmy Panetta. How has that gone? Because it just feels like he's an immovable rock on this issue, even though he's had a lot of people trying to talk to him, protesting in vigil outside his office, and on and on.
So J Street has had a delegation meet with Representative Panetta on a regular basis. And he is very cordial with us. He's a good listener. He asks good questions. We ask him to support different things that are going on in Congress. And I have to say that I'm disappointed for the most part. He hasn't supported our position for the most part. He's been to Israel a number of times through AIPAC, and we have asked him over and over again to please go on a congressional delegation through J Street so he could have a different view of what's going on, and he would also be able to go to the West Bank in addition to Israel, and that hasn't happened yet.
He has said he's been to the West Bank. He did just say that in a town hall. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I don't know.
But Sean Doherty sort of confronted him, and he said, well, I've traveled around and I've been to Israel. I've been to the West Bank.
Okay.
But
I can't say, but he hasn't been to the West Bank with J Street.
Yeah. Okay, great. Gotcha. So, before we get too far from Paula Marcus, we wanted to play her interview from the protest in San Francisco last Monday.
Well, what was meaningful about this?
Being together with other rabbis and clergy who had made agreements about what needs to happen to stop the war, stop the starvation, and bring the hostages home. A coalition of rabbis who might not agree on everything, but agreed about that and took action based upon our spiritual tenets and our beliefs and our values.
Okay. And in what way do you think that it was useful or effective?
I think that the press is going to make a difference. Having some people there for the press conference and covering the story will be important for people. And I also think that just for those of us who've been feeling so despondent about what's happening, to take an action feels like it's a way that we're able to at least lift up our voices and say enough is enough.
Great.
Yeah.
And what did you have to face, or what challenges were there in your being able to do this?
Well, logistics, and then also just, what people think about it. My own kind of, as a leader in the community, what the feedback would be. That was probably the biggest challenge. And, we'll see how it all plays out in terms of what people think about what we did today. But I feel like we did something that was really powerful, and, I'm glad that I was able to do it, even with those concerns.
Okay, great. And how do you think this fits in with recent statements by the URJ, the reform?
I think this is right in line. I mean, we didn't say anything in our statement that was different from what was put out by the reform movement. And there were other reform rabbis here today, too. I wasn't the only one.
But you were saying that there was a whole variety. There were conservative rabbis here
Conservative
too, right?
rabbis, Reconstructionists, renewal. Yeah, lots of different kinds of rabbis.
Were you surprised by that at all, or by who turned out, or anything like that?
Not really. No, actually, I was not. I mean, I think that's because we spent time crafting something that we could come to consensus about. It meant that it was a larger tent than some of the past demonstrations that I've seen.
Uh-huh.
We took the time to really work together,
Great.
and craft what was meaningful for all of us.
And what next steps for yourself do you
I'm not sure
foresee?
what can come next, but what my main agenda always is to bring peacemakers from Israel and Palestine to our community, and I have a couple events where we're going to be doing that planned in September.
Great. Do you want to
Yeah.
publicize any of those right now?
Yeah. So on the 15th, we're bringing an Israeli and a Palestinian therapist to do a workshop on trauma on September 15th. And then on the 17th, we're bringing to a house gathering to raise money for Standing Together, which is an Israeli and Palestinian peace group within the Green Line of Israel that does a lot of work, a lot of peace work, really robust. So those two things are happening.
And is everybody invited to both of those things?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Great. Thank you, Paula.
Thanks, Michael.
That was Rabbi Paula Marcus from Temple Beth El speaking at a protest in San Francisco in front of the Israeli Consulate last Monday, where rabbis sat in the intersection to actually even try to get arrested. The police said that they were understaffed and couldn't arrest them, so that didn't happen, but still pretty significant event, especially locally with some of our rabbis up in San Francisco. I did want to mention a couple of significant people. Stephen Zunes, a professor of Middle East Studies, we have spoken offline about someone that you knew. I don't know if you knew them personally, but who was killed in the West Bank, and it was just mentioned. Again. We mentioned it again. And could you talk about? I mean, this is a person who was involved in, I think, the Academy Award-winning documentary "No Other Land."
Yeah. Well, Mirza Khalifa was among a number of nonviolent activists who have been specifically targeted by the death squads, essentially the far-right settler militia that have direct support of the Israeli Defense Forces, and have often get support not just from right-wing Zionist groups here in the United States, but right-wing Christian groups, fundamentalist groups who see the settlers as taking over what they refer to as Judea and Samaria is necessary for the second coming of Christ. Now, of course, according to theology, all the Jews who didn't convert would be condemned to eternal damnation, but they want the Jews for Act 1, if not Act 2 of this scenario. It underscores that, when people say, why don't the Palestinians try nonviolence? They've been doing nonviolence for decades. For decades, there has been very, really impressive nonviolent struggle, often in conjunction with Israeli allies. And they have been consistently suppressed. We talk about the Israeli hostages, and of course, from the get-go, I've been calling for their release. But there are thousands of Palestinians in detention, the vast majority of whom are not charged. The majority of whom are there for nonviolent defenses. I mean, they are in a sense hostages as well. And so I think and as we saw in that Academy Award-winning film, which I recommend, that's streamable now, called No Other Land. It shows these Palestinian villages that the Israelis are bulldozing, that are systematically destroying in order to make room for a firing zone, basically, for Israeli occupation forces. Again, the resistance has been completely nonviolent. And so obviously the terrorism of Hamas and everything is horrible, should be condemned in no uncertain terms. But to as so many supporters of the Israeli government, including politicians of both parties in this country, it seems that if you talk about this kind of repression, they try to slander you by saying you're a Hamas supporter. And Hamas only has a minority of support among the Palestinians. They never had the majority. And this thing, they elected them, that's not true. They seized power in Hamas by force in a coup back in almost 20 years ago. But the fact is that there are many Palestinians who are working for peace and reconciliation, but they are targeted just as much as the militants. And
I had a different name. I had Adwa Hathalin.
I'm sorry, I mispronounced it.
Okay,
yes,
Adwa Hathalin, who was helping with the production of the award-winning film.
He's another nonviolent activist I know, but yes, that's correct.
Okay, gotcha. Okay,
he's fortunately still alive, but
yes, we're going to go to a break right now, and we'll be right back. We're talking to Stephen Zunas, professor of Middle Eastern Studies, and Rabbi Chaim Schneider, who was just up at a protest in San Francisco. We'll be right back after these messages.
KSQD thanks GPI Builders for supporting this program. GPI Builders is a locally owned and operated full-service construction company with more than 10 years of experience and expertise. GPI Builders specializes in home additions, ADUs, and residential remodels throughout the Bay Area. For more information, 1-800-916-8343 or gpibuilders.com. Thank you, GPI Builders, for supporting community radio, K-Squid.
Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, God of our ancestors, God of the Jews, God of all humanity, God of Abraham, who stood up to God to insist that justice be done, even those considered to be wicked. God of Moses, who spoke truth and the Torah of liberation to the empire. God of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, who shook his hand at God to call for justice and care for the powerless. God of Mahatma Gandhi and Reverend Martin Luther King, who taught the whole world about nonviolent resistance. Oh God, be with us today as we stand up to power, invoking the moral authority of our identities as rabbis, as clergy, to say that Israel, whom some of us have long loved, is acting in a way that is un-Jewish and unhuman. We will stand up to say that the killing must stop, the starvation must end, and all the hostages must be brought home. Remind us that these messages, these commitments for justice, compassion, and peace come from your presence within us. Give us courage as we take a small risk to our own safety, knowing that so many others face infinitely greater dangers. Ground us in your presence and in the knowledge that our moral clarity comes from you. Help us to take refuge in our relationships with one another, with the many people around the world who desperately want this madness to end, and to take strength from you within us and all around us. May we be safe as we step forward. May the work of our hands be blessed. May our message be heard in this building, around our community, and around the world, so that your will, the will for justice and compassion and love, will be done in the land that is holy to so many. Ken Yehi Ratzon, so may it be.
Welcome back to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills. We are in studio with Rabbi Chaim Schneider and Middle East professor Stephen Zunas of San Francisco State
University of San Francisco.
University of San Francisco, which is a Jesuit university.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And we're talking about everything happening in Israel and Palestine. There's so much, and what's happening here locally with rabbis starting to speak up in New York and also here in San Francisco. I wanted to make sure I mentioned the journalists who were killed as well. I feel like naming them is important. Al Jazeera's Anas al-Sharif was killed, I think, with some other journalists or staff.
4 others, yeah.
4 others. And Israel keeps saying we're not targeting journalists, but it seems pretty
In this
clear.
case, they did admit they targeted them, but they falsely claimed that he was a Hamas cell leader, which was total nonsense. I mean, he joined a unit in his 10 years earlier when he was 17. There's no evidence that he was involved in any terrorist attack, but he'd long since not been involved with the armed wing, and he's been a full-time reporter. And yet you remember there have been hundreds of journalists killed. This is far more than any wars. They are being deliberately targeted. I highly recommend people look at the Committee for the Protection of Journalists. They have a detailed report about this phenomenon.
Yeah, and that's really important because I don't think other journalists are being allowed in.
Correct.
So there are no international journalists there. There are only people living in Gaza, subject to being killed, being bombed, running for their lives sometimes, also trying to get food, also trying to survive. I mean, it's just a terrible situation any way you slice it. I also want to mention the New York Times Magazine cover story from, July 27th of 2025 about Netanyahu's handling of the war. And it was remarkable to read this. It's a very long, in-depth cover story with a lot of research into and talking to inside sources in Israel, and it seems to me also in Gaza possibly or with Hamas. And the number of times there was a moment where Netanyahu could have actually said, okay, we're done, this is a permanent ceasefire. There were several moments, and they were always interrupted by the most religious, sort of fanatical people in the cabinet, which would be, Smotrich, Bezalel Smotrich, and Ben Gvir. What's the first name for Ben Gvir? I could try to find it, but Ben Gvir. Everyone knows if you're following Israel, if you're Israeli, you know those names, and they have sidetracked and obstructed and completely like this. For instance, this ceasefire that happened in March, it was the religious right wing of Israel that convinced Netanyahu to go ahead and break the ceasefire, and their interests are in resettling Gaza. So then what is it if not an ethnic cleansing? If you have to move people out, it's at least an ethnic cleansing. With a lot of death, it's also a genocide, right? So do you want to talk about this article? I just think everyone should read it because it sort of goes in, it's the most sort of inside Netanyahu's thinking that I have ever read.
Yeah, it is quite detailed, quite devastating, and particularly from the New York Times, which has historically been pretty pro-Israel. But it does note just that how the far right is driving Israeli politics. I mean, people of my generation, we kind of grew up with this idealistic view of Israel. I mean, they're doing some pretty bad things to Palestinians even back then, but it was a social democracy. They were open to the idea of at least some land for peace. They were they were not driven by this very hardline fundamentalist messianic kind of religiosity, but they've come to dominate now, and it's really striking. If you look at U.S. policy, we've taken the position that if the Palestine Authority, if they, which is the recognized Palestinian government based in Ramallah, anti-Hamas. The position is if they had even one cabinet member that refused to recognize Israel's right to exist, that supported any kind of violence, and did not support the previous peace agreements, would cut off all ties. And yet you have an Israeli government which is dominated by people that don't support Palestine's right to exist, that are supporting these right-wing settler militia that are essentially terrorists, and that reject the Oslo Agreement and things, and that's fine. And this is it's part of this whole double standard that we've seen, for years. We say we support a two-state solution, but we only recognize Israel. We refuse to recognize Palestine. We punish UN agencies and other governments that do recognize Palestine. We're pushing really, really hard in the so-called Abraham Accords to get these Arab monarchies and other autocratic regimes to unilaterally recognize Israel, even though every single Arab government has gone on record saying we will recognize Israel in return for the end of the occupation. I think that I would say that the far right has gotten its power in Israel only because they know they can get away with it. Because if you look at the history of Israeli elections, they have moved left when they've gotten pressure from the United States, and they've moved right when they think they can get away with it.
Yeah.
And
there's an interesting audio of recording of Netanyahu in a meeting, like a closed room meeting, where he says, "Well, we can get away with this with the Americans." I don't know if you've seen that, but he's speaking in Hebrew, but I had it translated by someone who knows Hebrew and said, "No, that is what he's saying." Like we can do this. I just want to also say, if you're listening and you want to call in, you can call in to 831-900-5773, 831-900-5773. You can send an email if you are international or somewhere where you can't call, it's too late, or you can't be noisy, on air at ksqd.org, on air at ksqd.org. There's so much to talk about, and I think that Stephen Zunes, you have been on a panel with Anthony Aguilar, who is a whistleblower. I want to talk about the humanitarian aid operation, which is run by a group called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which, as far as I know, is run by actually Christian Zionists or Christian fundamentalists, which brings up this whole idea of extreme, sort of religious ideas about the area. And actually, let me ask this question really quickly before we go to the GHF. I've had people say, well, also you have Hamas being religious extremists. You have these Islamic religious extremists. And I've heard this quite a bit lately. Would you agree with that, Stephen? And then, or actually, Howie, how about you? Do you think that this is a problem on the Islamic side as well?
I'm not sure what you mean. A problem how?
Well, so Stephen has made an argument in the past, I've seen it in some of his writings, that a lot of Palestinians are actually not fundamentalist extremists.
Absolutely not.
But Hamas seems to be, is that correct? And is that a problem?
Hamas may be, but I don't know why that's a problem any more than their politics and being a terrorist organization. Now, of course, terrorism is a loaded word. To me, anyone targeting civilians are terrorists. And so that's something Hamas does, but unfortunately, that's something Israelis are doing now, too.
It's something the United States has done.
I was back in 1982, I was the first person in the United States to write an article in a major American magazine warning of the rise of Islamist extremism, their potential rise of Islamic extremism among the Palestinians. It was after a visit I had taken to Gaza, where I found the Israelis were quietly supporting them as an alternative to the more secular and left-leaning PLO, which later evolved into the Palestine Authority. And for decades, people like Howie and I have been warning that if we do not support the moderate Palestinians, give them a viable state alongside Israel, Palestinians are going to give up, and they're going to run to religious extremism, as peoples of all faiths have done under great duress and stress, and people tend to grab onto what they can, and would encourage violence and extremism. So Hamas is really a direct, and like at the time of the signing of the Oslo Accords, only 15%, 1/5, of Palestinians supported them. But as the so-called peace process led by the U.S. led to no viable Palestinian state, increasing colonization of the occupied West Bank, and the so-called generous offer at Camp David in 2000 was not that generous. It would divide the West Bank into 4 non-contiguous cantons, with Israel controlling all the movement in the airspace and the water, and it had been a Bantustan more than anything else. But the and that the failure of the U.S.-led peace process is directly responsible for the rise of Hamas. They got plurality in the 2005 elections, which enabled them to get a slight majority in the Palestinian parliament. So they had a cohabitation government, kind of like you have in France, with the executive and the more moderate Fatah and the legislature and Hamas. But then the Bush administration pushed Fatah to try to do a coup to throw them out of government. Hamas got wind of it, tried a counter-coup. They had a 3-day civil war, and when the thus cleared, Fatah controlled the urban areas in the West Bank, and Hamas ended up controlling the Gaza Strip. And this would not have happened if the U.S. hadn't intervened. Hamas would have never taken over Gaza if the Bush administration hadn't pushed this crazy coup plot. So again, this is not making excuses for anything Hamas has done, but I think we really need to acknowledge the role of the United States and and Israeli politicians and making possible their forcible takeover of Gaza and the tragedy we've seen since then.
Yeah, I mean, actions have consequences, right? And I shudder to think about how many more, Palestinian people are going to be now ready to, become terrorists because of what's happening. I mean, I shudder to think. So I have to say, we have a Substack called Moment of Truth Dispatch, and we have an article there on Anthony Aguilar, who we're going to talk about now, and also a whole article with photos and videos on the protest in San Francisco. I think we're the only local journalistic outlet that was up there. Anthony Aguilar, so go to Substack, go to Moment of Truth Dispatch, and Anthony Aguilar is a whistleblower that just came out of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is supposed to be distributing food to the Gazans, and Rabbi Chaim has a little introduction to what he has to say.
I want to talk about Tony Aguilar just for a minute, but I also want to say that I misspoke when I said that J Street supports a two-state solution, because you reminded me of the Arab League proposal that if Israel ends the occupation of Palestine, the entire Arab League, 22 states, would recognize Israel. So actually we're calling it now a 23-state solution. Yes, so Tony Aguilar recently had an interview with Jeremy Ben-Ami, the executive director of J Street. And there's a few things he said which I think are really important, because Tony Aguilar is a former Green Beret, a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, a Purple Heart recipient. So he's not, some bleeding heart liberal like we are, and or at least I should speak for myself, like I am. But here's what he worked with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. He was recruited to do security there, and he lasted about 3 weeks because he was horrified by what he saw. And he wanted to be sure that everyone knows that it is absolutely, without a doubt, that food and water displacement is being used as a punishment of the population. They're boasting now that there are airdrops. He says airdrops achieve nothing. They're a gesture, a platitude. They don't do anything in terms of bringing food to the people. He said the way it works is suddenly there's a message on WhatsApp that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is going to be open. There's a scramble. Hundreds of thousands of people have to go to only 4 sites in the entire Gaza Strip, 3 of them in the south, 1 in central Gaza, nothing in the north. They have to walk miles and miles to get there, and it's basically a survival of the fittest. People are absolutely starving. It's like the Lord of Flies type of situation. Whatever the amounts of boxes there are for distribution, within 7 minutes they're gone. So, it's like there's a desperate, and they're hungry to feed their families. They're fighting for survival, most of which are in varying states. Most of the people are in varying states of starvation. It's a deprivation of human dignity. He says basically the leadership should be held accountable.
Yeah. So I think, Stephen, you were on a panel with Tony Aguilar, and there have been some accusations that he was disgruntled and he wanted his job back, and so he was sort of retaliating. Of course, there's already a lot of reports and journalistic articles and agencies all over the world saying actually this is what's happening. So it's
his account is perfectly consistent with eyewitnesses of what's going on. I mean, they have killed as many as 1,000 people who have been lining up and trying to get food, and have this terrible dilemma: do you starve or do you risk getting killed? And, there are thousands of trucks on the Egyptian side ready to roll in with supplies. Israel's refusing to do this. This is a war crime. You cannot deny food and medicine to a population under siege. And the entire airplane, full of supplies are dropping. That's the equivalent of maybe 1 truck, and there talks about Hamas looting and everything. But both the Israeli government and the U.S. government have done reports. The New York Times, others have reported that there's not been mass looting. I mean, if you bring in food to feed the population, you may end up feeding the maybe 3 to 5% of the population that are armed Hamas people as well. But it's not like they're taking the bulk of the food or anything. So this is yet another major war crime, which is why growing international legal consensus is calling this a genocide.
I think we have a caller. We'll find out in a second. Caller, are you there?
Oh, hi. Yes. Hi, Amy. This is Sheila.
Hi, Sheila.
So there's a couple of things I wanted to say, and that is in agreement with Rabbi Howie or Chaim. Yes, I totally agree with him that rabbis can't stand by and not be considered complicit. And the fact that they have, in our community, have been standing by with the tens of thousands of deaths accruing and devastation up until recently now, really, it is complicity in my mind. And the only rabbi here locally that has consistently spoken out is Rabbi Chell. The other thing that I'm happy that Stephen brought out about the hostages. I'm waiting for the hostage, for the rabbis and for the Israelis to be calling for the release of the thousands of hostages that are in Israeli jails under unconscionable conditions and no charges. And I'm waiting for the call for all hostages to be released. I haven't heard it. So maybe you could address that.
Thank you so much, Sheila. And I also want to make sure we have a chance to address how do we get out of this mess. And I think that Howie, you wanted to say something?
Hi, Sheila. I just want to say that during the rabbis' protest in San Francisco, we actually did say all hostages, and we were referring to the Palestinian hostages in Israeli jails.
And let me also say that it's easy to say where have you been all this time? Why did it take you so long to speak out? But, we felt this way around Vietnam. We felt this way around Central America, South Africa, Iraq. And, I think it's important that those sentiments are understandable, and I feel them myself.
Yeah.
But that we welcome all the allies that we can whenever they come.
Yeah.
Because we need every person to stop the horror. We need every person to get our government to stop making this horror possible. And we should welcome people whenever they come and join us.
Thank you for the call, Sheila. We're getting close to the top of the hour, and speaking of welcoming people, so please go to the Substack Moment of Truth article on Tony Aguilar, because there's a video of him speaking there and also a video of him in a full interview with Tucker Carlson. And so we're getting some strange allies in this cause, which would be Tucker Carlson and other people like Nick Fuentes, who is very problematic because Nick Fuentes is actually very anti-Semitic. And so we're starting to get into a mix of far right and also Christian people starting to call out the killings in Gaza, but then also, Nick Fuentes says, "Oh, Israel, the Jews," is what he'll say. So that's, on the one hand, there's some hope in that maybe, even MAGA people will start to oppose what's happening. And we also have to be very careful. Where else is the hope is what I'm wondering. We're trying to get Panetta to move. He's getting AIPAC money. It feels like every month I'm seeing some kind of report from AIPAC, which is the American Israeli Political, not Action Committee, but Political Affairs Committee. And so anyway, where should people be focused?
I think changing U.S. policy is critical, and we can't change the administration's policy if the Democratic leadership is voting against us, including our own members of Congress. And so I think it's really important that we apply that kind of pressure. I think the leadership, including the Santa Cruz County Democratic Committee, needs to think whether they should endorse people who are effectively supporting an ongoing genocide. But what gives me hope is that I've been around enough to see how these movements, like in Vietnam, Central America, South Africa, Iraq, have grown. Even East Timor. Yeah. It was with people, supposedly hopeless causes, people rallied, and I think we can debate about the nature of Zionism. We can debate about one state, two state, but I think what's critical right now is we get together and unify and saying we should not be accomplices in a genocide.
Okay, How, you have a minute and a half.
Okay, yes, I totally agree. And, my partner asks me often, what effect is this going to have on the Netanyahu government? And I can't say I know what effect it's going to have, but I can say more and more people are stepping up. Hundreds of thousands of people in Israel yesterday went on a general strike. Yeah. And I think the more people, the louder our voices are, the more it's going to make a difference.
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us on Moment of Truth. And I want to just say, here at Moment of Truth, we have interviewed so many people on this issue: local Palestinians and Muslims, Jewish protesters, local Jewish dialogue facilitators, student encampment protesters, student arrestees, Izzeldin Abuleish, the Nobel Prize nominee and author of I Shall Not Hate, the featured activist Ashira Ali Darwish of When Olive Trees Weep, that documentary, Sean Doherty on Jimmy Panetta and AIPAC, and I'm now trying to get Aziz Abu Sarah and Maoz in here, or at least coming in on Clean Feed into the studio. And I'm going to link all of these shows to our show notes at our program page on the KSQD website, so you can check them out. I also want to mention the book Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, because it sort of clarified so much of my own thinking and put it into words and on paper, and I think it's just a very eloquent Jewish statement on the feeling of a lot of Jews, I think.
By Peter Beinart.
Yeah, yes. By Peter Beinart. Thank you so much. He's making the rounds now in the media, but I think people should go ahead and get the book. So Stephen and Howie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. This is great.
If you appreciated this program, join us every first and third Monday at 6 p.m. for our live broadcasts, and then pick up our edited podcasts at Apple, Spotify, and at YouTube under the KSQD YouTube channel as the podcast Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills. It really helps boost our program if you like, rate, and share our show at your favorite site and write a review. Visit our Substack, Moment of Truth Dispatch, for more on everything we talk about here. Plus, thanks to our entire team: Yanko Nyasu, Mei-Ling Obinata, Todd Zimmerman, Joy Schendeldecker, Michael Levy, and Batcha Kagan. Theme song by Todd Zimmerman of Nativerse Studios, logo by Kathy Krizik, and thanks to the entire KSQD team on the California Central Coast. Shoot us an email at amy@ksqd.org with questions or comments, and remember, if we don't use our democracy, we lose our democracy, and we can see that happening right now, so get busy, people.